Edward, did you, in some sense, think that Lear, as it stands in the Shakespeare, is an obsolete piece of work, something that had to be reworked and rethought for our times?
Well, I think that my starting point was a criticism of the Shakespeare play, and I imagine that if an audience knows that play, then they see the point of my play much more. But I didn't. I tried to write a play which would stand on its own legs, that it is not simply a criticism of someone else's work.
What do you think are the problems? I mean, if you see the Shakespeare play now in a theatre, in what way do you think it doesn't get through?
Well, you see, what I find unacceptable in the play is that it comes down to a philosophy of acceptance. That is that the world that Shakespeare was living in was in many ways unbearable. I mean, they were sort of hanging people on the street corners and all this sort of thing. And there was a great deal of suffering and so on. And all that Shakespeare could do, or finally what he came down saying, was that you have to accept this because there will be something else. You know, time will change and there will be an alternative society. Now, I think that this is a very dangerous philosophy for anybody who's living in my lifetime. The idea of acceptance in that way, although one has to accept certain things and try to protect one's humanity while one does so, nevertheless, one has to have a more active philosophy. That's simply because time is running out for us, so that Shakespeare could think, well, there will be something coming along eventually if one retains certain simple well, simple is the wrong word. If one retains certain human virtues, the virtues I try to retain, for instance, in Saved.
The language of your play is much simpler and starker than Shakespeare. Are there too many words in Shakespeare, in a sense, for it to really hit people in the guts nowadays?
No.
But you wouldn't be upset if people described your play as poetic?
I think it's open to many misinterpretations. I mean, poetry for me is truth, quite simply. You know, I mean, poetry is the analysis of experience. So what I find very distressing about poetry in the theatre is it tends to be clouded language. I mean, words seem to be added in order to get a heightened effect. Poetry is something different. It's taking away what is irrelevant and leaving what is essential, I think. I made Lear speak as simply as he could and still remain Lear.
There's a scene in your play where Lear's brought to trial before his daughters, and he uses this very powerful image of a wounded animal trapped in a cage with everyone else ignoring what's going on there. Is that the way you see the human condition?
Yes, well, I think that what's wrong with people is not, as most people seem to think, that there is too much license and too much freedom, but on the contrary, we have very little real freedom, and that as a society, from the moment we're born, we tend to be coerced and put into various institutional cages of one sort or another. And I don't think that human beings can live in that sort of setup and really be human. I think human beings are made for a much more creative, much more exploring life, a much freer existence, which you can't find in our society.
Yes, but the animals hurt as well. I mean, where has the wounding come from?
Well, I think the institutionalizing business that we all get involved in does wound the human personality. In other words, I don't think you can live in our society without becoming aggressive and without becoming rather dangerous. Yeah, it's the classical argument is, we find it in Hobbes and so on, that people are very dangerous, they must be controlled. It's around, I think, you know. So if we weren't controlled, we wouldn't be dangerous. And this makes complete sense to look at the of all animals, because then the way this development goes. It's paradoxical for us because we think, well, how could we not live in this sort of society we've got? Well, there are historical reasons for our being in the sort of societies we have. I mean, our species hasn't always lived in cities, for example. It moved into cities for certain historical reasons. Once you're in a city, once you're in that sort of organization, it's very difficult to get out. It's like being in the army. If you say to your superior officer, no, I'm not going to salute, I'm not going on parade, I'm not going to salute the flag, it's very boring and silly, and I really don't feel like it this morning. You know, if you're in a war, he'll shoot you, and if you're not, he'll lock you up anyway.
It seems to me in the play that with Lear himself, he goes through a process of self-knowledge first and then kind of raying out into a knowledge about the world around him. What do you think he's learnt by the end of the play?
Well, he's found out that most of his life he's made mistakes, and that the only way for him to proceed is to start undoing those mistakes.
It seems to me in many ways, but it is a very political play. I mean, you've got the autocratic ruler Lear overthrown by his daughters, and then there are the new forces represented by Cordelia and the carpenter that take over the country. Now, at first sight, they look like rather romantic, rather good, left-wing principled people. There's a sort of touch of the Castros and the Che Guevaras about them, but it becomes quite clear that because they're so remorseless in enforcing their view of things, that you disapprove of them as much as what preceded them.
No, I don't disapprove of them as much as what preceded them, because I do think there can be some value in a violent revolution. But what I think is that once you get into that situation and the violence manufactures itself, I mean, obviously it creates an atmosphere of terror. And in an atmosphere of terror, people are not going to act rationally and so on. Lenin, for instance, thought that you could use violence for a limited purpose. And I always insist that Lenin is a Stalinist, and it's not true to say, you know, that Stalin came along and perverted the revolution. Stalinism is the logical outcome of Leninism. The interesting thing now is, if you want to change society radically, which I do, because I don't think people are contented and happy in it, and because I don't think it has a future, if you want to change it, what alternative techniques do you use? It's a problem, I think, of education. People must understand what the dangers of our society are.
But that's a pretty long-term policy you're talking about. Are you prepared to wait that long?
Is it such a long-term thing? It's very curious, you see. I mean, I don't believe in this contradiction between do you make a revolution by changing a society or do you make a revolution by changing yourself. I think in an industrial society, curiously enough, if you change yourself, you are really making what is a very revolutionary act, provided there are enough of you, because what you then stop doing is stop doing things. You stop being a wage slave. You stop doing all that. You say, no, I won't be a conscript. I won't send my children to a school that I disapprove of, all this sort of thing.
You've said that you think education's very important. Is it deliberate that Lear, in the final act of the play, becomes a visionary, a teacher? Everyone flocks to hear what he's got to say.
That's rather different sort of education. I mean, he's sitting up there in his forest on a rock, and everybody comes and sits around him, and that's rather different from going to school. My objection to the sort of education we have is not that I'm anti-knowledge in any sense whatsoever. It's I'm anti-conditioning. It's the conditioning process of schools that I dislike. I mean, I really have been to schools where there was an atmosphere, almost a smell of prison.
Are you saying that any sort of institutionalization, whether it's educational, political, or whatever, is going to damage a central goodness in human beings?
What I'm certainly saying is that people are not basically dangerous or suicidal or murderous. In other words, that we don't have to fear the aggression in people. Goodness is a much more positive thing. I'm always astonished at the capacity people have for love and for a creative response to the world.
Not many of these chinks of light get into your play. There aren't that many positives. I think you shut more exit doors than Shakespeare in a way.
Yes, but one mustn't be sentimental. One mustn't kid oneself. One must be totally realistic, you know, if you're dealing with a problem like this. And so that one goes down for what one can rely on, what is essentially true. And I think that it's very important to not fool or delude oneself with false hope. But I'm a very optimistic person because I just feel that human beings are very strong and are capable of caring for each other. And that this is, I mean, that's quite enough.